Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our meeting this evening. This is a special meeting of the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee of the City Council. I hereby call this meeting to order. All committee members are present today via Zoom. This is a remote or online meeting where all participants will be on a video or audio conference. We are holding this meeting remotely so that everyone can participate safely while we are conducting business under a public health emergency. We appreciate your patience as LUPS meetings are conducted in this way. Members of the public will be able to address the committee if they have signed up for live public comment per the instructions published on the agenda and on our website Friday. Speakers will be moved into the meeting room 2 at a time. They will remain muted with their camera off until they are called upon to speak, at which point they can turn on their camera, unmute themselves, and will have 2 minutes to provide comments to the committee. After that, they will again be muted and return to be an attendee of the Zoom webinar. Written comments were also received and distributed to the committee members in advance of the meeting. Members of the public, city staff, and the media have the ability to view this meeting live through YouTube and Zoom webinar. The live stream can be accessed from most smartphones, tablets, or computers. For those watching on the live stream, thank you for joining us. Today's agenda contains both quasi-judicial and legislative matters. For that reason, council staff will be swearing comment. I don't believe that Councilor Gibson is here yet, but I know she is planning on attending. So we will go ahead and begin. We will now go to agenda item A060. 060 is adopting text amendments to the Integrated Development Ordinance 14-16 for the 2020 IDO Annual Update, including text amendments for small mapped areas. I would move a do pass. I don't see a second on that. Councilor Benton has seconded that. So let's begin with a staff presentation by Ms. Petra Morris.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, Madam Chair. Thank you, councillors. I am going to share my screen now and take us through a presentation that goes through each of the LUPS amendments. So in starting this discussion, just a bit of background for those who may not be as familiar with this topic. The IDO section 63D talks about a regular IDO annual update process. Oh, I've just been reminded that we need to be sworn in, and that should include me. So, Julian, would you like to swear me in?
Will all staff members that may address the committee today please raise their right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, that was a good reminder. Okay, so the IDO annual update is a aspect of the IDO. The intention behind this was
Madam
to provide
Chair, there's quite an echo.
Oh,
there's quite an echo. I don't know.
Thank you, Councilor Benton. We're hearing that here too. We're going to try to fix it right now. So give us just a minute while we work on this. Let's see if this works just a little bit better.
is that better?
Still there. Councilor Benton, does that work better for you?
No, I was wondering, maybe that if everybody mutes while Petra's talking, maybe that would help. I don't know.
Ah, yes, because we're in the same room.
When she starts again, just mute Counselor.
So are we're muted? Okay, no echo. Great.
Councilor Benton, do you still have an echo on that end?
I do not.
Petra, would you talk for just a second? Oh, yes. How about that? Any echo? Okay, so the IDO has a built-in annual update process, and this application is our second annual update. The first one being the 2019 IDO annual update. This is the 2020 IDO annual update. We are at about the midpoint in the process for this annual update. It starts with a submittal to the Planning Commission, and then moves on to full council. And this is the beginning of the council process. The notice for today went out on the ABC to Z email list, as well as all the standard legal required notices. This went to over 10,000 people on the ABC to Z email list. The EPC process started with 2 applications. The first part was citywide amendments. These are regulations that apply to the IDO throughout the city. And then the second application was for small mapped areas, regulations that are specific to an area such as Sawmill or Nob Hill in a particular mapped portion of the city. Both of these applications were combined in Bill O2160, which is the bill before us this evening. And the EPC recommendations are reflected in this through Exhibit 1, which is a red line of the IDO. To track the recommendations of the Planning Commission, the citywide amendments are in red and the small mapped areas are in green. The EPC held 3 hearings, one on January 21st, where both applications were heard, and then on February 18th, the EPC had just the small mapped area amendments, and then on March 4th, they heard the citywide amendments and made recommendations at each of those meetings. And so, as I mentioned, today is the beginning of the LUPS process, which is the beginning of the council process. Today's May 5th. This is the first LUPS. We are anticipating that there will be a second LUPS next week on May 12th. And then from that point on, potentially move on to the full council process. So I'd like to focus most of my attention and this presentation today on the packet of amendments. And so I'll go through each amendment with a little bit of background and summary on what each of these amendments do. So first amendment in the packet is the Arroyo definition. This amendment is in response to public comments that was received during the EPC process. This amendment adds the phrase concrete or reinforced arroyos to the areas that cannot be considered common open space in a cluster development. This amendment is specific to the cluster development building form, and the common open space is about the area on the site that is intended for protection. It's the thing that's special about the site and why you would want to do the cluster development. The common open space is a mechanism by which to preserve the sensitive lands on the site. And so by clarifying that concrete and reinforced arroyos are not part of this, we're clarifying that those are not really the type of sensitive lands that we're considering here. Arroyos are part of the sensitive lands list. Amendment A2, this is an amendment that would make Campground and RV Park, take it from the non-residential sensitive use zone district to being conditional in the mixed use medium and permissive in the non-residential commercial and non-residential business park. This is an amendment that was previously submitted to the Planning Commission. There was not support at the Planning Commission, and this amendment reconsiders it a little bit and takes the recommendations to conditional, as I mentioned, at mixed use medium and permissive in the non-residential commercial and business park. Campgrounds and RVs are very different from the other uses listed on the non-residential sensitive use list in that it's non-polluting, doesn't generate a lot of traffic, and has very limited impact on adjacent uses. We feel it's a little bit outdated that this use is still on the sensitive use list and should really just fit into the regular list of table of uses. And so these are the recommended zone districts for that. We are also seeing increased interest in campgrounds and RV parks as Albuquerque, New Mexico is a popular snowbird destination. Amendment A3. This amendment looks at two uses in relation to cannabis. Cannabis is divided into three uses: cannabis retail, cannabis cultivation, and cannabis manufacturing. In the cannabis cultivation and the cannabis manufacturing use-specific standards, it states that if the use is within 330 feet of a residential zone district, school, or childcare facility, it's prohibited. With a prohibition, there is zero flexibility, and this really limits where this use could occur. For example, if you have, which is quite popular, a school in a non-residential business park, no properties within that 330 feet of that school would be able to be used for cannabis cultivation or manufacturing. Regardless of the size of the site or conditions, they could be, several buildings away from that school. And so by shifting this from a prohibited use to a conditional use, it provides a little bit more flexibility to consider sites for the cannabis cultivation and manufacturing. Oh, and this is a new amendment. It's a topic that has come up since the post-EPC submittal, as it's a time-sensitive matter, given that the state legislature passed the New Mexico Cannabis Regulation Act this past spring. This second cannabis-related amendment, A4 Cannabis Distances, this is should be considered a kind of a tidy-up amendment. This makes changes to the cannabis retail, cultivation, and manufacturing uses to bring the existing regulations in the IDO in line with the recently passed New Mexico Cannabis Regulation Act. Again, like the previous amendment, this is a time-sensitive amendment that came up post-EPC application during the state legislature. The revisions in this, in adopting the revisions last year to allow cannabis retail, cultivation, and manufacturing, we needed to have some regulations in the IDO, but now that the New Mexico Cannabis Regulation Act has passed, we just need to make sure that all the regulations line up. Amendment A5, daytime gathering. This is again a time-sensitive concern that has come up since the EPC application was submitted. This amendment strikes all references to the daytime gathering use. This use, as defined in the IDO, is too broad and encompasses uses that it really wasn't intended to cover. If the definition were to be narrowed, we would run into concerns about potential discrimination against those considered a protected class under the Fair Housing Act. And so this amendment proposes to strike the daytime gathering use from the IDO. Amendment A6, geographic responsiveness. This is a response to EPC discussion and recommendations. This amendment proposes to strike the geographic responsiveness analysis. The analysis required as part of this section would require designers and developers to consider orienting their site and design towards views that may not be there in perpetuity. This section is very much a policy call and policy oriented, while the IDO is a regulatory document, and so muddies the water of regulation and policy. This isn't necessarily really the right place for this geographic responsiveness, and there may be a better location than the IDO. So this amendment will propose striking it from the IDO, but doesn't preclude the consideration of it in another location within the city's land use and planning documents. Amendment A7, light vehicle sales. This amendment would allow vehicles to be displayed outdoors in the MXH zone, unless located in urban centers, main streets, and premium transit areas. This amendment is in response to EPC discussion. The EPC recommended that it be that the activity centers and major transit areas also be included, and this amendment would strike those two from that recommendation, keeping the areas where outdoor display is prohibited to just MXH UCMS PT areas, UCMS PT areas zoned MXH. Amendment A8, this amendment, liquor retail and nicotine retail, is also in response to an item that was previously submitted to the EPC. The administration submitted this recommendation. The EPC did not support it. However, this recommendation is here and would consider making nicotine retail a conditional use in all zones unless accessory to a general retail or a grocery store. And this amendment would also make liquor retail a conditional use in all zones unless accessory to a grocery store. Amendment A9, this looks at the thresholds for the review body, approval body, for major public open space zone map amendments. This amendment is again a time-sensitive concern that came up post EPC. This amendment would make the EPC the approving body for all zone map amendments to the non-residential PO, public open parks and open space B zone district. That's non-residential parks and open space that are city owned. Zone map amendments to NRPOB occur after purchase, and the city council has a role in all purchases. And so it's not necessary for those zone map amendments to come to the council for approval, but just to the planning commission. Amendment A10, mixed use light drive-through. This amendment was one that was previously submitted to the planning commission. This amendment, my tongue's all over the place today. This amendment would take drive-throughs from a conditional accessory use to a permissive accessory use in the MXL zone district. When the IDO was adopted, the MXL zone district was the former C1. In the C1 zone district, drive-throughs were permissive if it was a bank or other use. But if it was a restaurant, it was a conditional use. And the IDO in the adoption had to choose between permissive or conditional and opted with conditional use. And this amendment would pick the other, make it a permissive accessory use. The IDO does not consider drive-throughs in association with the type of use. It's just drive-throughs are accessory to something and doesn't differentiate between drive-throughs for restaurants or banks or pharmacies, but just talks about drive-throughs in general. Amendment A11. This is a time-sensitive concern that came up post EPC submittal. This amendment lists the zone districts in which non-commercial broadcasting antennas are allowed. We realized in going through some stuff in the IDO that the IDO has a height limitation for non-commercial broadcasting antennas and a definition, but we failed to list what zone districts this use is allowed in. And this amendment would list those zone districts. Amendment A12, this is another time-sensitive concern that came up post EPC submittal. This amendment proposes bed limitations for an overnight shelter based on the underlying zone district. Overnight shelters are only allowed in the MXH, NRC, NRBP, LM, and GM zone districts. However, if overnight shelter is incidental to a religious facility and part of their mission, then they are allowed in the zone district that the religious institution is allowed in, and religious institutions are allowed in all zone districts. So the bed limitations talk about numbers for all zone districts. And so if you're in a residential zone district, the bed limitation would be 10 beds. If you're in a mixed use or non-residential commercial zone district, the limitation would be 30 beds. And if you're in the non-residential business park, light manufacturing or general manufacturing zone districts, then the bed limitation will be 100 beds. Amendment A13, this is a response to EPC discussion. This amendment completes the edits and revisions from P&M on their electric generation use specific standards and procedures. For those that were following the EPC process, There were several EPC conditions proposed, and in reviewing those conditions and putting them into the redline version, we worked further with P&M to make sure that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's, and this amendment kind of does those I dotting and T crossing with P&M. Amendment A14, post applications facilitated meeting. This is for site plan administrative. This again is a time sensitive concern that came up post EPC. This amendment proposes to strike low density residential development forms from the site plan administrative post submittal facilitated meeting, and then reduces the number of days in which a site plan administrative post submittal facilitated meeting can be requested. It reduces it from 15 days to 10 days. This amendment is an attempt at a compromise to make sure that the community still has an opportunity to request a site plan administrative post submittal facilitated meeting, while also making sure that the planning department is able to continue to do their work effectively. Amendment A15, this is a tech edits. This is a response to EPC discussion. This amendment contains edits and clarifications to the text based on the recommendations of the EPC. If you think of the EPC as a pond and you throw the stone in, with each recommendation, there's ripples. And so this is catching the ripples of those edits and clarification of the recommendations of the EPC. And this makes edits and clarifications to that language. Amendment A16, walls and fences. This is again a time sensitive concern that came up post the EPC submittal. This amendment limits the ZEO's authority in granting taller walls and fences to just those surrounding critical infrastructure. This was the intent originally of the CEO authority. When the IDO was going through the adoption process, there was a condition recommending that the ZEO be able to allow taller walls for P&M. And when it got translated into the IDO during the adoption process, it was greater authority was granted, and we're realizing that that wasn't really the right fit. And so this brings it back in line with that original EPC recommendation to limit it to just critical infrastructure, which is defined in the IDO as P&M, gas lines, and I've forgotten what else, but our utilities. And then also adds the missing phrase residential from low density residential development. Amendment A17, this is a small mapped area request. This is again a response to discussion at EPC. This amendment proposes edits to the urban residential form in the form-based zone district in order to make development of small scale infill residential more residential in form, and makes changes, especially on small lots, it makes changes to the language regarding building entrances, ground floor clear height, window percentages on ground and upper floor levels, sill height, and window shape. And then the last amendment, and this is again the other small mapped area change, is a previous submittal to the EPC. This is a proposed change to the Northwest Mesa Escarpment View Protection Overlay. This amendment proposes to add a second height sub area to the Northwest Mesa Escarpment View Protection Overlay. Today, there is the escarpment area, and then there is a single height sub area where heights are limited, and this would add a concentric ring basically around that existing height sub area. And so within this new height sub area, building heights would be limited to 30 feet. It would require additional landscaping. Landscaping would move from 15% to 25% and would limit potentially incompatible uses in this area. The changes proposed in here are looking to ensure a smooth transition from developed areas to the escarpment, or vice versa from the escarpment out into areas of development. Our escarpment is a very sensitive area, and this is looking to protect views and also to ensure that stormwater runoff is limited. That's the reason for the additional landscaping, and to make sure that that stormwater doesn't run into the escarpment, which is a major issue. And with that, that is all of the amendments before us this afternoon. So councillors, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Councils, are there any questions of Ms. Morris? I don't see any. Therefore, let's move on to public comment if there aren't any questions from the councilors. And I guess I'll say first, because you're not quite here in the room yet, but hello to those joining us to provide public comment. Here are the public comment ground rules. Comments are to be addressed to the committee members only. Please keep your comments germane to the topics on the agenda today. Any disruptive conduct or non-germane commentary will result in removal from the Zoom webinar. There will be a 2-minute time limit. The timer will start once you begin speaking. Then the Zoom moderator, Mr. Moya, will let you know when your time is up. Mr. Moya, would you please call on the name of the first speaker? And do we need to swear them in? And he will also be swearing you in. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first speaker is Jim Strozier. Mr. Strozier, if you don't mind raising your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
All right. Thank you very much, counselors. Jim Strozier, principal with Consensus Planning. I want to just real quickly try and go through a couple of comments on a few of these proposed amendments. And I'll start with Amendment A2. And I'm not sure I wrote down the numbers of all the amendments, but this is regarding the RV park designation and adding zones, and that is the NRC and NRBP zone, where that would become a permissive use, and the MXM, where it would be a conditional use. And I just want to urge your support of that amendment. I believe that Councillor Gibson has been working on this, and I think it is a great idea. Currently, it's limited only to the NRSU zone, and I think this is an appropriate change. I also wanted to mention with the Coors VPO, there were a number of changes that were proposed, and I think a lot of those changes were really geared towards clarifying the regulations as they relate to analyzing projects. I have one issue with that, and that is, and this is an issue I've had with it from the beginning, so it's not a new thing, but now combined with the addition of buildings not being able to penetrate the ridge line, the use of the 45-degree angle, that would be great if Coors was a straight road, but Coors is not a straight road. So there are places where Coors veers to the east and where it veers back to the west, and that 45-degree angle doesn't necessarily point you to what I think the view we're trying to protect, which is the main face of the mountains and the Sandia Crest. I think that ought to be changed from 45 degrees to a direct line between Coors Boulevard and the Sandia Crest, which captures the face of the mountain. I think it's easy to do, and I think it would be very effective. I also want to support Amendment A5, daytime gathering spaces. I think that is an appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Strozier. Your time is up.
All right, thank you. I tried to get through as many as I could. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Councillor Gibson, do you have a question?
Well, actually, I do. I have a request. I'd like to hear the rest of Mr. Strozier's comments. I think he's trying to be efficient in his communication, so I appreciate that, but I would like to hear the rest of it, if that would be okay.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. And Mr. Strozier, you better talk fast here. You're going to get Councillor Gibson in trouble.
I will. I only had one more point, and that was support for the removal of the amendment A6. And I think that that would be better handled, as Ms. Morris said, in another part of the city process, maybe the DPM, or I'm not sure exactly how to best do it, but I agree with the amendment A6. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strozier. Our next speaker is Russell Brito. Mr. Brito, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and I will need to swear you in. So if you can please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councilors. Good afternoon. Russell Brito with Public Service Company of New Mexico. First, I want to thank council and planning staff very much for working with P&M on text amendments to this annual update that we feel will clarify the status of the electric facility plan and the processes that electric facilities go through under the Integrated Development Ordinance. A couple of years ago, when the IDO was first adopted, P&M worked with planning staff and council staff to make sure that electric facilities like substations are permissive uses in most zone categories of the IDO, except for sensitive use and parks and open space. But because electric facilities are ubiquitous and they're commonplace, they're allowed in all zone categories. We've worked with planning and council staff to ensure that the review processes reflect their permissive native, because a lot of times it's a site plan with a perimeter wall and landscape. I did want to point out to the committee that battery renewable sources, and I wanted to ask consideration that battery storage as a primary use also be allowed to go through the administrative review process. Thank you very much, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brito. Are there any questions from the council? Thank you, Mr. Brito.
Our next speaker is Dan Rich. Mr. Rich, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself. I will need to swear you in, so if you can please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Okay, I'm glad to be here. I'm a developer and operator of a RV and boat storage facility located off I-40, and I'm very familiar with this sector. I'm in support of Councilor Gibson's amendment regarding RV parks in non-residential zones, and I'm glad this was reintroduced after the planning department removal recommendation, which was inconsistent with actual circumstances and without basis. There has been a sharp increase in RV travel and a high demand for RV stay locations. The reasons are manyfold, but it is partially contributed to COVID, people wanting to avoid airports, hotel rooms, cruises, but it's not just vacation travelers who are contributing to this increase. We're talking about contract tradespeople, traveling medical, and digital nomads, who are people who don't have a home, they're professionals, and they use the internet for their work. And this is a very much growing sector. RV parks are booked. We hear this repeatedly because we have our thumb on the pulse, being where we are and who we see on a daily basis. People tell us they've called everywhere. They have a sense of desperation many times. They have to bypass Albuquerque or stay in a commercial parking lot like Walmart or somewhere else with the fear of being shooed off by police or security or property ownership. And they may have to choose a place out of town or where they're uncomfortable staying with their families. So this is a real problem in Albuquerque. We want people to come here and leave with a favorable impression and share that favorable impression with other people which will contribute to more tourism and more visitors. The benefactors being local vendors, restaurants, many of whom I've been in touch with. They've expressed favorable support for this. Mobile service technicians like mobile mechanics, 50%, excuse me, 50% of their business, mobile RV mechanics, is travelers.
Thank you, Mr. Rich. Your time is up.
And I'm,
Thank you, Mr. Rich. Your time is up. Thank you. Thank you.
thank
for
you,
being
everybody.
here.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Joe Valles. Dr. Valles, please feel free to turn your video on. Mute yourself.
Too bad I get my two.
And if you can please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Yeah, it's hard for me to start with this thing because, first of all, here we go again, another mass dump of IDO amendments. And that why a special Lux hearing for this? Why not go through the EPC process? We always get preached to about process, and I don't know where that is. In terms of, I'm really interested in this one because it was easier for me to interpret the A6 Geographic Responsiveness. Where did this come from? The EPC supported, I think Sabatini and Parrish were in support of the amendment before it was proposed as an amended amendment. And so I don't know where you guys are coming from. To not even consider views and development, just the word consider is leading the city in the wrong direction. This whole process has to stop until you define what the amendment process really is. It can't be one or the other or sometimes. You're not listening to the public. And then Petra says some of the amendments in the packet are same amendments that were introduced to the EPC but did not get EPC support. Which ones are those? And so this amendment proposes to strike the proposed section 52D2 in the red line of the IDO. However, removing 52D2 from this amendment is ignoring every reference in the comprehensive plan about making the most of the exceptional landscapes and views presented by Albuquerque's exceptional and unique geological opportunities. This amendment is an affront to reasonable stakeholders, whether they be from the development community, neighborhood stakeholders, and on. These quick fixes are part of a trend to diminish the city of Albuquerque into the future for all of us. And I wish you'd listen to some of us sometimes. Look, I appreciate your time, but you've already moved it and seconded it. I think we know where this is headed, but it's wrong. It really is wrong. Be careful about losing the faith of people while you're governing in the city council. Please do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Valles. Our next speaker is Peter Calyptus. Mr. Calyptus, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and I will need to swear you in. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth? Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Full written comments that I'd like to include to the record of this meeting. I'm commenting on A12 and A5. I recommend residential zoning is allowed for, if residential zoning is allowed for overnight shelters, should be conditional with use of needed on-site support services. Mixed use in NRC zones should have possible separation of different mixed use zones. Exception is MX8, conditional use could be permitted with a capacity of 30 as they are often needed near residential. M8 zones permissive use with a capacity of 30 overnight beds. This would be reasonable capacity for the neighborhood to support. NR zones, if they're not within about 500 feet, 30 beds permissive, 100 conditional, allowing for more shelters, adult family shelters. 100-person capacity in some zones provide greater facilities for family. MXL and MLT are frequently next to, or they actually have housing. So that's more, that would be the conditional facilities allowed to be 1,500 feet apart. If this is going to be permissive versus conditional, technically you could have basically 20 houses apart. You could have the zone as far as distance. Are these changes going to affect the current Gateway Center? And because it would really help if it did. And daytime gathering facilities, it may be good, but I'm wondering where things are going as far as like, could someone open up a soup kitchen in a residential area? And I'm concerned about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Miss Ward. Miss Ward, please feel free to turn your video back on, mute yourself, and I will need to swear you in. So if you please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Sorry. So community members were surprised to learn of this meeting in advance of the regular LUP schedule to entertain additional amendments proposed for the IDO. Citizens had only a few days generally to review the additional material on top of their already busy lives. That councilors would rush through the many proposed changes to the IDO again would make a skeptic wonder if there is any sincere interest in a development scenario that promotes a healthy and beneficial quality of life for the people who pay their public salaries. It is the obligation of elected officials to serve in the public interest, not the interests of out-of-state developers, their local agents in the private and public sectors, and their local counterparts seeking to minimize or eliminate meaningful public input. It is highly problematic when the public input is not transmitted faithfully from informed citizens to the councilors because council planning staff misinform the councilors irrespective of intent. I respectfully request that each city councilor perform his or her own true due diligence on the matters before the committee. This will require adequate study time prior to voting on the scores of proposed changes. Public or private association with commercial real estate interests and builders creates the appearance of a bias in favor of those interests in quasi-judicial matters. Those councilors with associations such as these should recuse themselves from participating in any quasi-judicial matter. Several proposed amendments are problematic and should include meaningful public input beyond this afternoon. Some include distractive statements that are irrelevant. I believe there's one on the drive-throughs and increasing drive-throughs or allowing them to be I can't find it. I'm sorry. Conditional or conditional except there's a reference to the pandemic, which is a red herring, and making them more available to neighborhoods when ironically in the pandemic, we are seeing the traffic problems created
Thank
by.
you, Ms. Ward. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Our next speaker.
Just a moment, please. Councilor Benton, do you have a
Madam-
question?
Yes, just I did want to respond. Certainly agree about the concern about drive-up windows, but on the first point of the timing of this meeting, I wanted to ask staff and or the chair perhaps to clarify that the process that was the schedule that was laid out for hearing all of this has been in place for a long time. And these amendments, of course, the councilors have every right to bring forward, but we did not receive the packet from the administration until considerably later in the what I think we had intended the schedule to be. Is that correct? I'll ask staff that question.
Madam Chair, Councillor Benson, that's correct. We had anticipated getting the amendments out about a week ahead, and unfortunately, timing wasn't on our side. And so we didn't receive the packet quite in enough time to get the packet out a week ahead, but we did get it out on Friday, which gave the public some time ahead of today's meeting, just not as much as we would like. And clearly the public would like.
Just wanted to make that clear. There's a lot of insinuation that there's a bunch of backroom dealing going on here. And I want to clearly state that I'm offended by the accusation and it is not happening. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Renee Horvath. Ms. Horvath, if you'd feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and I will need to swear you in. If you could please raise your right hand Do you swear to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Okay, thank you. I am also, when I learned about this LUPS meeting being this Wednesday, I was very surprised because there's a lot of amendments that we've had to review. We spent hours, we've spent days, weeks, years being involved in this process, and this really does affect our community. So when I saw an email from somebody in the community that the LUPS is this Wednesday, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have time to write up comments for this or to review them. And there's 18 new amendments. And, you know, last fall, we had meetings to go over these amendments before the EPC hearing. We haven't had that done here before the city council. So you have 18 new amendments that we're scrambling to understand some of these amendments, and so we can make decent comments on them. And so, and also this 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes comment on all these items is not really giving us enough time to really discuss the pros and cons of some of these amendments, because I still have a lot of concern on some of the old amendments, and now I've got to study the 18 new amendments. And a lot of people are really feeling discouraged right now about this whole process. They keep saying the process is broken and we don't have time to review this. We don't understand them. We need some help. We need some help from our counselors to give us time to help us understand these amendments. And I have like a dozen I'd like to comment on and discuss some of the pros and cons, but I don't have time to do it right now because I only got 2 minutes. And I just want to read you an email that I got just before this hearing. I sent out a notice, hey, we got a hearing, and this is a response. Renee.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. Your 2 minutes are up.
Could I read this?
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask if she could go ahead and read that.
Please go ahead, Ms. Horvath.
So this is a neighborhood that's had to deal with some of the IDO changes. And so his response when I sent out the notice that there's a meeting today, he says, Renee, I sold my home this week and Larry also sold his home and has already moved. My neighbors across the street are moving to Dallas. 2 more neighbors are looking to list their homes. And they have already destroyed our great neighborhood. I really don't think anything can be done until this IDO and current administration, including the counselors, are removed from office. The IDO deprives residents of their rights. So I just want you to kind of realize there's a frustration from the community over this process. And someone reminded me that this
Ms. Horvath, thank you. We allowed you to read that. I think that would be sufficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair?
Councilor Gibson?
Okay, I think that we did talk early on when we were beginning the meeting about the schedule and moving forward, how this is going to progress through LUPS and then to council. So maybe, I don't know if Ms. Horvath may have missed that first part, that this is not the only LUPS meeting, but we'll have another one on the 12th when they'll be discussed. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you. And since there seems to be a bit of a misconception on staff sitting on this, I think it should be noted that this went up to the 11th floor, as is standard, once it came out of EPC. And it sat, we didn't get it back down for at least a month and a half. So, I mean, it's not that the city council nor the EPC is trying to drag their feet. Sometimes things just take longer. So please, we're trying to do the best we can with this. So let's ask the next speaker to come forward.
Our next speaker is Peggy Norton. Ms. Norton, please feel free to turn your video back on, unmute yourself, and I will need to swear you in. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Okay, I admit that I'm remiss in not knowing exactly what you are approving today, if it's all the amendments that were proposed by the EPC and approved by the EPC and these 18 additional ones, or if this is just the 18 additional ones Petra presented.
If I may, Ms. Norton, may I, please? There seems to be such a misunderstanding here. There will be another meeting. This is the first hearing of these, so we will not be approving anything. We merely had to move and second in order to get the comment so that we can then move it on to the next meeting. There will be no vote on approval this evening.
Okay.
Just to clear that up. Thank you.
Okay, but you are I mean, this does have to do with all the ones the EPC had and some new ones.
It means that we will look at everything that came before us that came down from the 11th floor.
Okay, okay. Because I did go over them closely for the EPC meeting and we submitted comments. And I actually sent those pretty much same comments in today. And so I just want to be brief. That geographical orientation, I do support that. View protection also is more than just seeing the tip of the Sandias. There's a bosque there that I believe that west side view protection was intended to include. We still do not support RV parks and campgrounds are concerned about them being on 4th Street where we already have about 12 or 14 used car lots. Drive-throughs, we don't want to see expanded. Actually, any of these that address COVID impacts, we do not support. The pandemic is hopefully a short-term problem, and to have long-term solutions, we don't support that as a reason for having these changes. I am concerned about cottage development. I look at that Acequia Jardines. It's a very nice co-housing development, but I don't know of any others to look at and see what the ramifications of cottage development in the IDO are. And the one last thing, we support the DRB having some discretionary impact. And cannabis growing, it's in an enclosed building. I'd like to know that whether that a greenhouse is an enclosed building, can it be opaque, or it should be stated that it has to be opaque because the lights can really impact the neighborhood. Thank you.
Ms. Norton. Our next speaker is Jane Beckel. Ms. Beckel, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and councilors. I want to speak today in support of Amendment A13 as it was described today. I'm a longtime resident and homeowner in the area that's encompassed by the Northwest Mesa Escarpment VPO. It contains some of the most sensitive geologic and cultural features in the city. The views from the escarpment and up the escarpment are incredible, both looking east to the mountains and the Rio Grande Valley, as well as the western horizon and the volcanoes. I believe the provisions in A18 support development, which is of low density and low intensity, consistent with the nature of this land, as well as with the existing development. There is a provision on the Mesa top for high intensity urban center. So I think allowing the rest of the Mesa top to be developed with low intensity is really critical. And finally, as somebody who has seen the damage from erosion, directly seeing the damage from the erosion of runoff over the escarpment, I believe that the additional landscaping requirements, while they may not be entirely adequate or sufficient, are certainly relevant to that. And thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Peggy Neff. Ms. Neff, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and if you can raise your right hand.
I am raising my right hand.
Do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon, counselors. With respect, I'm exhausted at having to fight and argue, write and rebel, push and shove my way into having a place in the visioning exercises of my community. These feelings are echoed in all of the meetings that I've been part of in these 2020 amendments. My apologies if my suggestion that Councillor Benton and Councillor Jones recuse themselves on these IDO matters caused offense. But really, our public comments fall into what I call the neighborhood abyss. And to watch my colleagues and my suggestions and concerns be ignored again and again, this causes me offense. Anyway, specifically regarding these 18 amendments that were put forward on Friday, you have my emails and I'll try to summarize here. The Arroyo Definition. Community members and council do not have the same understanding for a common open space. Lands that would not otherwise be built upon in a normal site plan without additional architectural needs due to their sensitive natures should not be included in common open space calculations. This is kind of cheating. More importantly, this amendment uses language that is not yet in the IDO. I don't know how you can be able to listen to public discussions and yet refer to this as a fait accompli, as to somehow allow this verbiage that is hypothetical in the least and wrong in the accurate interpretation to be put in front of you. Campground in A2 and A10, campground and RV park and MXL drive-throughs. These would not be allowed under our sector plans. The IDO would not be able to, should not be able to do this without communicating fully to the 600,000 residents of Albuquerque. Both of these plans negatively affect residential properties and change the walkability nature of the city. My link to the secret IDO map that shows the residential areas stopped working last night, so I can't provide specific details. A6, Geographic Responsiveness. I think this amendment striking positive changes for improved building characteristics is wrong. I think we should be having more restrictions on building characteristics as our available land is almost gone. We have the capacity to improve. Why not? Why deny the improvements? A7, light vehicle sales. As I said in my email respectfully, Paseo Central, Carlisle, San Mateo, Coors Boulevard, and shopping centers along those routes do not need another vehicle retail lot, nor do their nearby neighbors. A12, overnight shelters.
Thank you, Ms.
I said
Neff.
suggestions.
Your time is up. Thank you. Madam Chair, that concludes public comments.
Thank you, Mr. Moya. Councilors, are there any questions for the staff or the administration? Councilors? Councilor Benton. Councilor Benton, you're muted.
Sorry, using my iPad at the office is a bad idea. On A6, the language that's the amendment that I'm sponsoring with regard to geographic responsiveness. I wanted to ask the staff, the language as it came from the EPC is strictly a suggestion. It requires a developer to provide an analysis or prepare an analysis of the views from the property. Yet, I want to confirm this, it does not require any staff review of that. It's really just checking a box, is it not?
Madam Chair, Councillor Benton, yes. So the way that the geographic responsiveness is proposed would require an applicant to submit an analysis, but they're not required to actually address any of the views. It would be basically they would need a note on their site plan as it's worded that they either have or haven't considered the views. And it also, if they did consider the views, wouldn't really provide any protection going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. And this is the reason I have this forward. I want everyone to understand. I totally agree with the intent of the language and the idea that I think it would be crazy to build a development and not look at, take the best advantage of the views. And I'd be surprised if anybody in a commercial area would ignore an asset of that sort. But that's the reason it's out there. That's the reason I did ask to sponsor this amendment to the IDO. And I'm open-minded about it. I want to hear from everybody about how this could really be effective and not just be an exercise that has no teeth whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councillor Borrego, do you have a question?
No, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to defer.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of councillors? If not, I will second the motion to defer until the May 12th LUPS meeting. Do I have a second? I just seconded. Never mind.
You were the second.
I was the
Counselor.
second.
I made the
Long,
motion.
long day today. Thank you. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
We have to do a roll call.
Roll call vote.
It's been a long time since I've done this like this. Sorry, guys.
Mhm.
Roll call.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor Benton,
Yes.
Counselor Borrego,
Yes.
Counselor Gibson,
Yes.
and Counselor Pena.
Sorry, yes.
And that passes on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you, councilors. I'm looking forward some more discussion on these and maybe some tweaking. And I will see you all on May 12th for the LUPS. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.